morning, everyone, and welcome back from coffee. I hope you all had a chance to chat with the people you wanted to, had a look at some of the visual harvesting, which is great fun. Now, as I mentioned before the coffee break, this particular session is about decarbonisation in the iron and steel sector. And it's actually being done in partnership with the World Steel Association and supported by IRENA's Alliance for Industry Decarbonisation. As I mentioned, there are two parallel sessions. One is the Youth and Innovators Hub at the ITC office. That is just down the road to the left. And the other is Solutions to Decarbonise the Chemical and Petrochemical Industry. So if that's what you want, you need to run up the stairs and go up the stairs. What we really want you to come out of this session with is a better understanding of how innovation in renewable energy, both direct and indirect, can actually support decarbonisation of iron and steel. What are the enablers? How do we make that approach cost competitive? And the thing that's really interesting to me is this is not simply a question of what's possible with the technology, but it's also about innovation in infrastructure development, innovation in finance, innovation in regulation. And to start it all off, I would like to introduce Luis Janeiro, Team Lead End of Use Sectors at IRENA. He's been working in Bonn on the end-use sectors for a number of years, and his current work focuses primarily on advising IRENA members on how to use renewables to decarbonise end-use sectors. So, Louis, if you would come up.
Thank you very much, Felicia, and welcome everyone to this session on solutions to decarbonize the iron and steel sector. I will start with a brief introduction or a brief overview of IRENA's work in the area of end-use sectors. What you see in this slide is a small selection of relevant work in the field, starting from the top left, the World Energy Transition's Outlook, which lays out a pathway to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement by mid-century with renewables. The Innovation Landscape Report, which presents an exhaustive inventory of innovations, sort of a toolbox for policymakers to deploy a smart electrification of end-use sectors. Then you see several thematic reports in the area of hydrogen, synthetic fuels, chemical sector, aviation and shipping. In the area of iron and steel, we have been supporting the Breakthrough Agenda initiative together with the IEA and the UN high-level champions with a report that evaluates the progress in the sector, particularly with a focus on international cooperation. We have also supported the Indian presidency of the G20 this year with a report evaluating the potential for increased circularity in the steel sector. Needless to say, all of these reports are available for free in our website. Apart from publishing reports, IRENA has several initiatives to engage different stakeholders in decarbonizing the end-use sectors. One such initiative that we launched last year is the Alliance for Industrial Decarbonization. The primary objective of the Alliance is to enhance dialogue, raise aspirations, and coordinated action among its members to decarbonize industrial value chains. We have now 55 members, including companies from multiple sectors: energy, mining, steel, chemicals, among others. And we have a representative from the Alliance here. I don't see you so far, but you must be somewhere. If your company or your organization is interested in joining the Alliance, please reach out to us and we will put you in contact with Safar. Now, moving on to the topic of today's session, and as a matter of introduction, just a few notes from IRENA's perspective on the steel sector. As you all very well know, the steel industry is a key enabler of human development and progress. If you reflect a bit about every action that you did this morning to come to this session, it was in one way or another enabled by a steel product. About half of that steel is used in buildings and infrastructure. Other major uses are the automotive sector and machinery, appliances, devices across a variety of sectors and applications. So steel is really everywhere in our daily lives. At the same time, steel production has significant negative environmental impacts. It is responsible for about 7% of global energy-related CO2 emissions and has broader environmental impacts in some cases, like air pollution, etc. And this impact is deemed to continue unless we take decisive action. So the transformation of the steel sector is crucial, also because we need clean and competitive steel to produce the core technologies for the energy transition, for instance, electric vehicles, solar PV structures, etc. So there's no complete transformation of the energy system without a transformation of the steel sector. Here you see a historic perspective on the growth of steel demand over the decades. The demand of steel has been growing relatively steadily following economic progress, particularly in the early stages of industrialization and modernization of economies. The world consumes today approximately 2,000 million tons of steel per year. That is 10 times the consumption 7 decades ago, and also twice what we consumed just 2 decades ago. This acceleration of growth has a lot to do, in the last couple of decades, has a lot to do with the growth in emerging economies, markedly China. And when we look at projections of demand, although the projections differ, they tend to point towards somewhere in the order of 500 million additional tons by 2050 to reach 2,500 million tons per year by mid of the century. So what is the challenge? The challenge is that unfortunately, most of the steel that is produced today is produced with using fossil fuels as a source of energy and also as a reductant agent. What you see in the graph here is the 3 main production routes today. The height of the light blue columns indicates the share of global production of the route, to be read in the left-hand side vertical axis. And the darker blue dots, the triangles, show the approximate emissions intensity of the route, which is to be read in the right-hand side axis. As you can see, more than 2/3 of the global steel produced today is using the blast furnace basic oxygen furnace route, which runs on coal. The direct reduction route has lower emissions intensity, as it typically runs on natural gas, although there are some jurisdictions where it runs on coal. And the lowest emissions intensity is achieved today through electric arc furnaces, which run on electricity to recycle steel scrap. And this route today accounts for about 1/5 of global production. One of the key advantages of steel is that it can be recycled. And in fact, steel is routinely recycled in electric arc furnaces, as I just mentioned, but also in blast furnaces. And this capacity to be recycled makes steel a key enabler for the circular economy. And because electric arc furnaces can be run with renewable power, then there we have a clear route towards low-carbon steel. So what is the problem? The problem is that the availability of scrap. Scrap only becomes available decades after the steel enters the economy. In a recent study for India's G20 presidency, we did an analysis of future availability of scrap and the implications for the decarbonization of the sector. What you see in blue is a projected global demand for steel until 2050, and in yellow you can see the projected availability of steel scrap over the same period. So recycling accounts today for about 1/3 of steel production, and in our estimation it could grow to somewhere between 40% and 50% by 2050, depending on the demand projection. So 50% is already a quite optimistic assumption. So this means that we will need primary steel production starting from the mineral, from the iron ore, for many decades to come. And that means that we need solutions to decarbonize those primary production routes. So before concluding, a quick reflection on what are the solutions that we see from IRENA's perspective. What you see in this slide is the composition of the key factors that drive the environmental impact of steel products and the levers that, from IRENA's perspective, we can pull to progress towards a more sustainable sector. Starting from left to right, first, we should explore ways of optimizing the use of steel where possible, without compromising human progress, obviously. Second, minimizing the need for primary steel production by maximizing scrap recycling as scrap becomes available over time. And thirdly, we should also make steel production processes as efficient as possible. Already the industry has a very strong incentive to be efficient because it's an energy-intensive industry, but there's additional potential to improve efficiency. Now, all of these solutions can make a substantial contribution to our sustainability, but they will not be sufficient to decarbonize the sector by mid-century. In the end, we need to deploy clean sources of energy and reducing agents so that the sector can really truly decarbonize. And it is precisely about that, about how to accelerate this transition towards clean production methods, that is the focus of today's discussion. From IRENA's perspective, we think that renewables will play a central role in this, and we do see very promising developments with many project announcements, for instance, for renewable hydrogen-based steel. We will hear some of that today. Also, we see progress in other technologies that could enable the use of electricity directly via electrolysis, although these are further away from commercialization. And of course, this transformation cannot happen overnight, and it's a massive challenge. It will require structural shifts in technology, in the way we do regulations and policies, in the way we do business, in the structure of supply chains, and also in the skills that are required for these new technologies. And we think that we will need innovative solutions across all of these dimensions. Today we are very lucky that we have a great panel of experts that are actually working on this every day to solve this challenge. I'm really sure that we will learn a lot from them. So with this I conclude. Thank you very much and looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you. So the panel discussion this morning is going to be moderated by Andrew Purvis, the Director of Sustainable Manufacturing at the World Steel Organization. Andrew, would you like to come to the stage? He's going to be leading the discussion on what exactly we do to decarbonise iron and steel.
Thank you. Thank you. And good morning. Thanks for coming. I'm Andy Purvis. I'm Director Sustainable Manufacturing with the World Steel Association, and we're very, very happy to be supporting this panel and this event. I wanted just to give a quick introduction to World Steel. Some of you might not know us. Look, we are the global industry association for the iron and steel sector. So if you think of a steel company, there's I think a very good chance that there would be members of World Steel if they're making steel. And we do a couple of things. One is we support our members in supporting each other in transfer of leading practices and exchanging on topics as broadly from environment and climate, technology, sustainability, right through to safety and health. The other aspect of our work is to, I guess, engage in conversations around steel and promote the understanding of the steel industry among, I would say more broadly, our ecosystem, our stakeholders, our suppliers, but also the financial sector, the energy sector, and others. And I'm delighted to be here and to be able to support this conversation today, which hopefully will help with that. We have really a broad spread of issues we want to talk about today. As we heard, our industry is a 2 billion ton industry. It's diverse, it's global. Not all steel producers are going to follow the same path, decarbonization path, and there are very different challenges for steel companies in different regions, in different situations. And I hope we'll hear some of that today, because the panel today will include some, what I'll call legacy producers, but also some new startups. And our industry isn't one where we've had new startups for quite a long time. So it's quite an exciting time, I think. So what I would like to do is invite my panelists one at a time to come up. Please come up and give your elevator pitch. If you could tell the audience for 2 minutes or so something about your organization, what you're doing in this space. And after that, we will get into some conversation around innovation and the role within the sector. So, Christopher Gusek, Head of Steel Technology with H2 Green Steel. Please come up to the stage and tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, you heard my name already. It's Christopher Gusek. I'm working for H2 Green Steel. Before that, I worked for traditional steel producers like thyssenkrupp and Salzgitter as a plant manager, and for other companies as a CTO, but also in the metal industry. And because of that, I have a very bad, call it carbon dioxide karma. And that was also one reason why I joined H2 Green Steel. We are a company founded 2020 as a startup in the steel industry, and we will build a plant in northern Sweden which will produce in the beginning 2.5 million tons, afterwards in 2030 5 million tons, nearly carbon free. And that maybe is a first short introduction, right?
Thank you.
2 minutes gone. Good.
Excellent. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you. I will invite Robert Janeiro, who is Head of EU Affairs with ArcelorMittal, to please come up and say your piece.
Thanks very much. Jeekel, ArcelorMittal. I'm based in Brussels. ArcelorMittal is a global company, the second biggest global steel company. The first one is Chinese. You just saw also the big increase there in China of the steel industry. Our company is global, so we are in different continents. It means also we are in different developments of the setup of the decarbonization pathways, and that's why we keep an eye on each technology which would be able to decarbonize the steel industry. You can say, for instance, waste wood in the blast furnace, there's all Torero process. Of course, green hydrogen, CCU, CCUS. We have a plant that goes with our waste gases in a bath of bacteria. The end product is ethanol. But at the same time, we will also have ships now on their way with CO2 to CCS storage. And we are planning already testing the green hydrogen actively, of course. We are the only ones in Europe with already a DRI plant. It's in Hamburg right now, running on gas, but of course we have to be hydrogen ready. So we have all types of technologies to try, because you don't know what technology, of course, is going to be best used where. A good example is that we will discuss it later in the US, where we're also investing in the hot briquetted iron making, and for any market. So it's going to be very interesting times, and this discussion is also very interesting because it's the time to invest in the technologies, and there could be multiple ones. So this is a brief description of what we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, and please take a seat.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Two little things, one of which is completely my fault and one of which isn't. The one that isn't is, could you turn your phones off? Because that's what's setting off the microphone, apparently.
Yeah, mine's on aeroplane, but I can turn it off completely.
If you have questions for the panellists, do remember to put them up on Slido.
How to do it?
Okay.
Work here?
No, your phone, you have to switch.
Turn everything off. Job done. Okay, I will invite José. José Noldin, hopefully I'm getting that right. José is the CEO of GravitHy, another intriguing startup that hopefully you can tell us a little bit about.
Thanks, Andy. Wrong and wrong. It's Noldin, and it's a GravitHy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Nice to meeting you all. Thanks for being here today. It's a pleasure. Thanks, IRENA, for the invitation, and congrats on the organization. I'm quite impressed, actually, with this stage. So congrats to everyone that was involved in this organization. So José Noldin, a Brazilian CEO of GravitHy, which is a company brought together by 6 industrials to accelerate the decarbonization of steel production. So our company, the ambition is to build and operate DRI units fired by hydrogen. So the whole idea, the whole concept is that, as it was said before, every ton of steel, more or less 2 tons of CO2 are emitted. The good news is that 80% of those emissions, they come from the iron making part, so conversion of iron ore into metallic iron. So the whole idea is to replace altogether carbon by hydrogen and actually disrupting the market by decoupling the value chain. So the current model, steel producers, they make their own metallic iron. The whole idea of GravitHy is actually decouple the value chain, making iron where it makes sense to make iron, and let steel to be produced where it makes sense to make steel. And happy to be here to share a little bit more on where we are and what we plan to do.
Thank you. Please take a seat. And finally, well, here we are in Germany, so we'll take a local flavor. Our final speaker is Samuel Flückiger. Hopefully I've got that right. That's one thing I've got right this morning. Who is head of EU climate policy with thyssenkrupp. Please.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss steel decarbonization here, which is the #1 topic on our minds, most definitely. The steel industry is on the brink of, I think, one of the biggest transformations in its long history, and so it's very interesting that we can discuss this here as well. As said by Andrew, I'm Samuel Flückiger. I'm head of climate policy at thyssenkrupp. I've done the rounds a bit, working on policy issues from different perspectives, including civil society, public sector, and now really at the front line in the private sector. thyssenkrupp is a leading manufacturer of high-quality flat steel products. Interestingly, as opposed maybe to Arcelor, we have a very, I would say, local footprint. We operate almost exclusively in Germany. At least that's where we have our biggest CO2 footprint, our primary steel production. At the same time, it's Europe's largest integrated steel site with 4 blast furnaces, 11 million tons capacity. So it's quite a beast when you look at it. So certainly the challenge of transforming this is definitely quite a daunting task. And this is what we are embarking on with our first direct reduction plant, which will come online 2026. So similar timeline as H2 Green Steel with similar capacity, which we will be integrating within our current site in Duisburg. So a lot of similarities, but also some different challenges, as you can see. And I think that's what makes this panel interesting as well. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Samuel, please take a seat. I mean, it's Innovation Week, and we're here to talk about innovation. And as an engineer, probably my mind goes to technology. But of course, innovation is broader than that. So I hope we can have a conversation this morning about some of the other sort of enabling aspects of this transition. I agree entirely with Samuel. I think this is probably the most exciting time in my 30 years in the steel sector. Everything's changing really quickly, forever. The steel plant as we know it is different, but it will be different in the future. So let's start about talking about sort of policy and innovations in policy. After all, this whole debate is largely policy-driven, or certainly policy-enabled in terms of the transition. You hear a lot about green steel, low-carbon steel, net-zero steel, near low-emission steel. The issue of definition is important, because if we're going to have market pull, and we'll come to talk about that, we need to understand what we're talking about. So, Samuel, maybe we should start with you. Clearly, to sell low-carbon steel, green steel, you need to know what it is. There's been some discussions within the German context, I think, on that whole definition piece. So maybe we can start with that.
Thanks, Andrew. Very happy to. And indeed, this is one topic which keeps us busy, because there's no such thing as steel. Steel is not steel. There's many different types of steel. So when we talk about low carbon or CO2 reduced steel, it's actually very important that we have a common definition and a common sense of what we're actually talking about. There's been a lot of work on this, including at the international level, as mentioned by Andrew. The IEA has done a report which proposes a basic framework of how to define what is actually low carbon, and I would say especially Paris-compatible sort of trajectory for the steel industry. And on the basis of that, define what's actually low-carbon steel. This is an approach we very much support, which is also scrap-dependent, because as we saw before, scrap availability is limited, so you need to find a way so you account for this limited availability of scrap and the necessity to decarbonize the primary part of the production. And so what we are currently doing in Germany is that we are building on this definition which was proposed in discussions with the government and the stakeholders, including consumers, civil society, academia, to actually come to the market with a sort of labeling scheme that will provide information to the market. So it's really, you can think of it as a sort of transparency exercise to systematically provide some information to the market, and to do that according to very clear rules that are the same for everyone. So everyone provides the information according to the same rules. And this is testing the waters a bit, right? I mean, I think this is very much work in progress, and we will have to course correct, I'm sure, as we learn from experience. But the idea is precisely to create this transparency in the market and ensure that everyone applies the same rules.
Do you feel this is something with the potential to be global? I mean, do you think is there space in our market for a single definition, or are we looking at potentially a mosaic approach with different definitions that work in different regions, different purposes?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I would say it depends how you look at it. I think the system should be normative in the sense that it should give some indications as to where the industry eventually has to be on a Paris-compatible trajectory. So, but then I think there's the time element. You know, by when do you allow which sort of level of the steel from which regions? I think that's probably where there will have to be a bit of flexibility. But I think that the system, and that's also what the IEA proposed, has to be normative in the sense that it's really based on top-down assessment of what's the budget available, carbon budget for the industry, and on the basis of that, defining what are the sort of end goal where we have to be in terms of, you know, the transformation and run on 100% green electricity. That's the end goal. But then, yeah, the time scale of how quickly different regions move on this scale, I think that's probably where, you know, there is room for discussion. But I would argue that the system should be, basically, the concept should be the same as much as possible for everyone. So it's clear that everyone knows what we're talking about.
And we define steel, and increasingly jurisdictions are, I guess, involving low carbon definitions, sustainability in trade policy. You know, we've seen carbon border adjustment mechanisms being designed here in Europe, but also Australia are consulting. There's other regions looking at potentially using CBAMs or other similar methodologies or similar policy tools. What would you say is the potential impact of that type of approach on steelmakers, whether they low carbon steelmakers or perhaps legacy steelmakers who are on their transition?
Wow, we're opening the CBAM Pandora's box. That's a very interesting tool, which is just about to be introduced in the EU. I don't know how familiar you are in the audience, but the basic idea is really to make sure that as we have industry facing the cost of CO2 for production in Europe, that we also make sure that imports are also paying for this CO2 costs. So it's like a counterpart of the fact that the free allowances are being phased out in the EU, and as a counterpart, because the EU industry is paying more for its carbon, you also make sure that imports are paying for the carbon. So in principle, it's a very, I would say, basic idea. Of course, as we know, the devil is often in the detail. We are only just on the brink of looking at all the technical difficulties which with implementing such a system, which will be bureaucratically very difficult. But if you look at what it means, basically what's going to happen is that production cost increases for European producers. The cost of imports will also increase because they will be paying the CO2 costs. So what you have is you will have an increase of the costs on the European market. And so the question is, of course, how quickly this is being done, how difficult, how it will be done practically, because this is still to be solved. And one issue which is still left unaddressed is, of course, what happens on third country markets for European producers, because there our products will become more expensive. So that's one question which is still left unaddressed, because we will become less competitive with our products on third country markets. So as you can see, this is still, we're just at the beginning of implementing this policy. I think it's important to understand where it's coming from, which is the counterpart of the EU ETS. As we phase out free allowances, we make sure that imports are covered. Very good idea in principle, but as I said, devil in the details.
Sure. Thank you. Robert, you described ArcelorMittal, I think, as number 2. I think we can say you are the largest international steel company. I think it's fair to say. I think Baowu are number 1, but they're Chinese in their focus. You deal with a lot of different jurisdictions, a lot of different policies. How would you see the link between policy and investment and your investment decisions?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. First of all, I would like to make an example why the steel industry here is so, the investments in the steel industry is so crucial also for renewables. And that's why, of course, the Congress is. Our crucial, basically, priority for these investments is the existence of a lot of renewable supply of affordable prices. And for that supply, you need for a future society, basically all your future societies, you need 3 times more steel per megawatt hour. And ideally, of course, you want to make that steel in your region, in our region. So this is really crucial, that link with steel and renewables and the innovation of that for the investments and for the renewables. Now, how to get, for instance, the supply of renewables in a society, in our case, Europe. The real issue there is you need to have that based of two parts for us. Is one, the investments need to be massive, because it's not only for, as it was very well explained in the introductory, for the electric arc furnace which has to run on electricity basically, but also to make the renewable, the hydrogen, ideally as close as possible. So these are really key investment characteristics. Now, how to get these renewables? There's one criterion which you really need for that, is to have a relationship between the cost of renewables and their pricing. And in Europe, that relationship is gone. So I think in most of your regions there is a link. Then when you source renewables, you can buy that for cost plus, contracts. In Europe, that is for the steel industry, in fact, almost impossible, and it's also not yet the silver bullet. Then you're not finished. So in Europe, we have a market. It means that our pricing is done on the marginal pricing. In most regions, this is not the case. And we had the leverage on, for instance, what we wanted to buy, of course, is renewable PPAs. These have been really stable, the cost of renewable PPAs, for a long time, and the link with costs has been very stable. But then, of course, we had the energy crisis with the Ukraine war. And then you saw a peak in certainly an increase in the pricing of that, not in the cost, in the pricing, which was basically doubled. So we had a very stable in Europe, but it was in Poland, of course, 66, in Spain much cheaper, 33, but very stable. And then suddenly all doubled. And of course then there is at the same time a shortage of PPAs in Europe. And who is going to buy? Who can buy when they come to auction, the PPAs? So first of all, those are now in the hands of the big four, Apple, Amazon, Apple, etc., Bitcoins, but also some other industrials. But basically, they're short. And for our investment decisions, it's really crucial that we can access these renewable PPAs. Now, how to get these volumes running? That is a problem on this market, because you need to create then a long-term vision on your power market, and that is a black hole. So we need to establish that. Everybody agrees with that. So in order to get that, you need to re-establish the relationship with cost and prices, like in most other regions in the world, but not in Europe. So we actually make ourselves an extra handicap here, which we shouldn't do. For instance, in normal power production, let's say France, you have 10% on gas and carbon, the rest isn't, but everything is basically linked to that price. And we should re-establish that. Then you can getting more affordable prices also for the steel industry. This is really crucial. Until this happens, we need some kind of a prioritization when auctions happen for PPAs, for instance, or pricing arrangements in the market. So it's not a matter that we, as steel industry, cannot pay for it. Now, these prices are basically too high what they should be in Europe, like they should be like the rest of the world. So this is the basic, a very important one, renewable pricing, renewable volumes. Then secondly, we're here in Innovation Week. I have to disappoint you a little bit, because most of the funding, and I'm coming now to funding, you hear about the IRA in the US. That's a very good way to fund incentives in industry. Something similar in the way they do it, we need also in Europe. That's a very good example with the best practice for everywhere in the world. In Europe, we have as much money of that, but it's the way how you do the funding. I can give you one example. In Europe, we have the Innovation Fund. Basically, it's a lottery. There's a very small chance you get money from there. You cannot really make your investment decisions on that. So in Europe, what we need to do in Europe, we need to change the funding in a way that's more simple, easier to know what for investment decisions. But it should also be focused on large-scale investments, like in the US, for instance, maybe like in your countries as well. And not only on an innovative part, we just need a large-scale investment running. And for that, we need also the funding in place, and to be clear what the funding is, because low carbon or zero green steel is just more expensive now than the market can pay. So you need to have some funding for that. I think the international aspects has already been mentioned. I think that's very clear. And we need to have the hydrogen in place. And for that, we think for both, we hear that targets for renewables are not met in Europe. We hear that targets for hydrogen are not met, and we need them, of course, in big volumes for affordable. Again, it's the same discussion. Quick example, hydrogen bank, very good idea. But if you do an auctioning in society, and it could be also in your countries, for hydrogen on the scale, it's the same as renewables. Other people can just, and companies and sectors can just pay more for these volumes. Secondly, the volumes which are now at stake for in place for the bank are just not enough for a steel site.
Yeah.
So there's no way we can win that. Of course, we hope there will be some prioritization or even segmentation in the further up developments of that bank. And then you can make, if you have some vision about all these elements, then, but this is really driven by policy, as you hear, then you have an investment decision. But we need that clarity of those policy decisions.
Okay, thank you. It'll be interesting to get a perspective, I think, from our new starters, because one of the questions I have in my mind is a lot of the policy that is governing the steel industry and driving investment has really been designed with legacy producers in mind, and with the help, in many cases, of legacy producers, and our EU affairs guys here, I'm sure, have been engaged with policymakers. Maybe I'll start with you. What would you say are the main policy challenges that you have trying to start up this new approach, and how they might, is legacy policy helping, or do you need something completely different?
Yeah, that's a little bit different, because this is really something we would like to see, that we are on an equal level playing field here. Because when we started with the idea of our startup, we had to get all the money and the equity from our investors and the money from the banks. So there is no big funding at all. And this is the main point, what we see. I fully understand that all. But there are so many state-owned fundings right now for the traditional steel industry, as I said, what I fully understand. But if you really look at sometimes, not always, but sometimes that really goes to locations which are not that suitable for that, because there is no energy, the price is not good, there is no green energy, and this is something what we say to that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And from your perspective?
Well, I can only agree in several points. As a startup, so I love this industrial startup, but it's a startup that needs to raise 2.2 billion euros to make the first plant, in a combination of equity, debt, and maybe some subsidies. So minimum, let's call it between 1 to 1.5 billion euros debt. Indeed, to have access to those money today, it's quite tricky, because we cannot provide the guarantees that an established, a legacy player can do it. We don't have a balance sheet to say. So if we order the equipment, for example, we cannot give the guarantees, the collaterals that are needed for the suppliers to sell it to us. So definitively we need to provide instruments that allow newcomers like H2 Green Steel, like GravitHy, to move forward. There is plenty of money in the market. I believe the banks, the financial institutions are realizing that the transition, the decarbonization is a reality that needs to be supported. But in our case, if we look all the different instruments that are out there, they are not suited for companies like us. But the thing is, the transformation will not happen without newcomers like H2 Green Steel, without GravitHy. We are not there it's not a one or another choice. It's how can we make sure that we have the instruments for the legacy players to keep their jobs, to keep the markets and their importance into the system, but also having the instruments that companies like H2, like GravitHy, they can move forward and contribute to what is the biggest challenge of mankind, at least for the last 5 centuries.
One of the things I've seen among the startup organizations, you've put much focus on locking in purchase agreements from customers well before you've made any steel.
Indeed.
This seems to be an interesting, different approach, and it kind of goes to a discussion I wanted to have around markets and business models.
But I love this question, Andy. I didn't see that coming, and I love it, because that's exactly, it comes back to the previous discussion, you know. It's not that we are doing these as a sort of strategic approach, it's a necessity. To our, again, in GravitHy, I need to be able to convince banks to give a loan to us of 1 to 1.5 billion euros. And as we cannot give the guarantees to our balance sheet, we need to somehow to credibilize our cash flow projections. And the only way to do this is by finding innovators, first movers that say, you know what, I'm going to buy it, this product. I know it will be more expensive, but I'm committed. I made my pledges to decarbonize, and I'm going to buy it, and guess what? I'm going to pay a premium. Mm-hmm. So we need those first movers. Personally speaking, I believe so much in the future of a green steel that if it was my choice, and only my choice, I would not sell anything in advance. I would wait the market in 27 and sell it, because I trust that the right prices will be there. CO2 prices evolution will be a surprise for us. Prices will skyrocket. So I tend to believe on that, but I cannot do it. It's not a choice to make, because otherwise banks will not, will not give us the money that we need to finance our project. So indeed, as we don't have a balance sheet, the solution which we, as a newcomers, we found was to make this a pre-sales agreement, which somehow give more, let's say, solidity to our cash flow projections, and then they have the assurance that they need.
And you've taken a similar approach, right, José?
Yeah, we're having a similar approach. We've also already sold a high amount of our material, which we are going to start to produce in December 25. And these are long-binding contracts. Some are 7 years or so. And this is really, for me at least, it shows that there is a real demand of steel which is good for our environment. And I know that most of you in the audience are not steel experts, but maybe just to say that if you buy, let's say, an Audi A6 or maybe a Mercedes-Benz with a weight of 2 tons or what that is today, the carbon emissions for that car are roughly 4 tons, right? And I really believe we have to change something there, and we see that the demand is there. We have these long binding contracts, and that was the possibility for us to find the equity, to get the banks on board, and this is why we could start.
Yeah.
And if I may add just one point, and what is nice on this approach, that actually it unlocks the whole value chain. So by the time we have first movers that are willing to sign a contract with the H2 Green Steel to get steel in 28, with the GravitHy to get a DRI in 28 and paying the premium, they make our project to be bankable. By the time we are bankable, we can also justify the investments on the renewables. Otherwise, it's a project on a project. Banks don't like that. They will not give the money for a project that relies on another project.
Sure.
By the time that one of those projects is no longer a project, is a bankable operation, then you get the money for the renewables, and then you unlock. GravitHy in France, it's a 1 gigawatt. So it's 8,000 terawatt of electricity which is needed. Imagine how much opportunity you have for windmills, for solar panels. But today they cannot bank their projects on us. So we need to move forward. So it's a chain. So this value chain approach needs to happen all at once. It's a great opportunity.
Both of the don't know if legacy companies is the right word, I don't think like using that, but the traditional steelmakers, you both have got low carbon product offerings that you're selling into the market, X-Carb, Blue Mint. That suggests that you feel the demand is there. Samuel, and what's your view on is the demand there now? Do you feel you're getting that demand signal from the market for these low carbon, low emission materials?
We do see signals in the market for sure. I mean, it was mentioned here, we have some of the same customers, of course, so that's no surprise. So I would say, especially in some of the, I would say, high-end premium brands that have strong commitments themselves, there you do see a willingness to pay and to pay the green premium, as we just heard. This is important, I fully agree, and it's also important for us. We are also negotiating some so-called MOUs, so these are not yet binding purchase agreement, but it gives an indication as to what the sort of quantities they want and what they would be willing to pay. Personally, I think this is not what's going to drive the large-scale transformation. So, the mass market in that sense. So, for me, then the question is, how do we make sure that let's say, the premium product, or let's say the decarbonized product, also goes into those mass markets? And there, I think it's really a matter of a mix of instruments. Certainly, there is a role for the public sector, I would argue, in terms of leading by example and introducing in their own public procurement clauses for actually incentivizing the demand for these kind of products. You have product policy as well. In Europe, we have a very sophisticated product policy where you could introduce some sort of minimum requirements on the steel, including, of course, the CO2 footprint, or let's say the decarbonization, but also other criteria, environmental, social, etc. And then indeed, I think we need to get the ball rolling, because once those products come to the market and they become the norm, then you might quickly have a tipping point. So my sort of analogy is always to say, I would really wish for the steel, the indicator of the steel to become the new CO2 per kilometer for the cars. This came out of the drive that they had to reduce the consumption for the cars, and this became one of the main criteria the consumer was looking at when actually buying a car. They wanted to get a car that was as efficient in terms of mileage or kilometer per unit of fuel that you use. And if steel becomes the next sort of criteria that customers actually look at when purchasing a car, I think then we will have gotten a long way, because then essentially the demand will really be there in the market. So yeah, getting the ball rolling, and we see how difficult the financing is. We just got a big support grant from the German government. The idea is precisely this: it's to get the ball rolling, and by doing this, we actually have ripple effects throughout the value chain, because now there is a certainty that we will be needing these amounts of renewables and green hydrogen, which justifies investments upstream from our perspective to actually produce all this, invest in the production of all this renewable electricity.
I mean, we're sitting here in Europe. There's a lot of Europeans talking about this stuff. I'm aware of Manel as well, which is unfortunate, but our other moderator was taken sick, so I've slipped in, so I apologize for that. But is this purely a European story? I mean, Robert, you have your fingers in other markets around the world, South America, to the east as well, joint ventures in India. Is this market, are you seeing any market demand in those regions, or is this, in Europe now, climate policy is fairly mature and long established? Are you seeing the demand in those other regions as well?
It's clearly starting in Europe, that you see. I think the proof will be in the European pudding, if you want. But two things. One is, in Europe, we always think we're leading in the policy and other countries are trailing. It's a bit, now US came up with their surprise IRA Act, that is a bit gone. It shows that other regions can do it too.
Yes.
and can actually do it better, probably. So we'll have to see how this goes in the other countries. It's still not materialized, of course, as we all know. One thing will be very crucial here is also how the product policy, like it has been already mentioned. So will there be lead markets? But also, how will, let's say, a wind tower to come here to this conference, or a solar panel? It's not in the CBAM. So you can actually import it with, if you want, brown steel or any steel for product to Europe. And then the carbon cost in Europe will be very high for that same product. And you will be, it will be much more difficult to make such products than in Europe. So those discussions also and impacts on the downstream will have a really big impact on the actual, let's say, green products market and premium market, and how this will go, and how will the interaction between the different regions will be. Is it beneficial then to be in Europe and to have such markets? Is it better to be out and waiting? This is now going on. What you see now was really crucial discussion of what we were just asking. You have now the global plan, of course, from the US, from Biden, and Europe from the global steel and aluminium agreement. The question is, will it come or not? But these will be very interesting new developments. I think if it goes in a certain direction, it would come from these kind of developments. So will there indeed be regions of the willing, if you want,
yes,
to do this together? So this will be very, I think that's also your question, how will this develop? I think this is so twofold. One, bottom up from the market. What will be the products, what will the downstream do? And this is basically top down, if you want, how this will be done from the regions. And that will then have supposedly it has, of course, an effect of other regions to join that. And then, of course, you need to adopt certain kind of policies. I think that is, of course, also the idea of the CBAM in Europe, to incentivize others. Now, if the CBAM is not effective, it will not really have a big effect of others.
Sure.
If it is, then it will have a bigger effect. So as we have been described already, the proof will be in the reality when it comes.
No, that's right. I mean, we are a very global industry, right? And the proportion of steel that travels internationally and intercontinentally is huge. So any policy in a major consuming or producing region is going to have implications in others.
Maybe that is fundamental. I don't think we really stress it that much compared to other products. So I know there are sessions now on other products. You can have chemicals or cement. For steel, this is so, because it's so international, you can trade it everywhere. I
believe around 40% of steel crosses intercontinental borders, and for steel products it's a little bit higher. So we are, I mean, that's why this whole discussion, I guess, of trade exposure, and as local policy comes in, is really so important in our sector. I have another couple of topics I want to talk about in the time we've got left. I'm going to keep technology till the end, because I think we can talk about technology a lot, and probably till we run out of time. Well, probably engineers, or at least some of us. I want to talk about skills a little bit as well, because there's a huge transition happening in our sector, and I think in more broadly in society. And we talk a lot about, green skills and the new skills that people will be needing. A lot of our industries are quite traditional. In the, with the blast furnaces, we've been working pretty much in the same way for hundreds of years, the same fundamental technology. Everything is going to change over the course of the next 20, 30 years, and a steel plant will look completely different. So I'll be keen to explore the skills that we need and where there's a shortage of these skills. Christopher, I mean, you're setting up a steel plant.
True. In
a place that isn't probably well endowed with a local population who have high skills, right? This is a steel plant which is rightly located for access to renewables, raw materials. People, not so much. How are you addressing that challenge of getting the right people in those roles?
Yeah, this is, of course, a challenge, and I think it's everywhere a real challenge to find good educated people right now, at least in Germany, in Sweden, wherever you are. But of course, the challenge there in Boden is a little bit higher, but we had to go there because what we need, and we discussed it quite a lot, you need a lot of electricity and you need a lot of, I call it green electrons, right?
Yes.
And what we are doing is we are erecting there our hydrogen plant, the DRI, and the steel plant. And the good thing is it's a greenfield project, and the workforce we need for our 5 million tons is much lower than from a traditional steel plant, which is clear because it's a greenfield project, right? But however, yes, we have to find, of course, people which are living there. There's Luleå, it's not that big. There's the Boden area. And we also hope that we are able to get people from other countries also to this plant. So we saw that when we founded our company, which is based now in Stockholm, fully understood, this is a town everybody wants to go, yeah. But it was very easy for us to find people working for us, coming from all countries all over the world, right? And but very clear, it's a big challenge. I guess we will get people from the area around our plant, but we also have to hire people from abroad. And of course, also we need the experts because it's a greenfield project, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you made the point, I think, that a new plant or these new plants will have less people probably than traditionally. So, Samuel, if you look at where you are now in TKS and you're running sinter plant, blast furnace, BOF, full integrated steel plant, if you look towards the future, how do you see, I mean, what's the role of government, private sector in reskilling? And is there a need for a conversation around the just transition in steel in the same way we've talked about that in sort of mining areas?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a conversation we are having. We are, of course, very concerned by this topic, and it's a big priority for us. You might know Germany is very unionized, so of course the unions have a lot to say in our strategy and transformation, and so the job security part of the equation is really a top priority. We'll talk about technology later. I mean, the way we are doing the transformation is to make it in a sort of minimally invasive way, so we can really maximize the existing assets that we have on site. It is a challenge in the sense that there will be certain new skills that will be needed, especially with some more chemical profiles,
yes,
which we didn't really have so far, so that's new. The main challenge for us is also just people in general, like the amount of people. We have an aging population, so we will actually lose half of our staff in the next 10 years, just for natural reason, which means we actually need to hire half of our staff, 20-something thousand people, over the next 10 years. So that's a huge challenge, and you need to, of course, get people interested in actually working for a legacy industry, if you want. That's in transformation, of course, but so that's a big challenge, to get these people. And then interestingly also, in the course of the transformation, because we will be running and phasing out all the assets in parallel with the new assets that we phase in, yes, we actually have a net increase for a moment in terms of total people employed, before it then sort of stabilizes again quite close to where we are today, according to our current estimates. So it will be, let's say, job neutral in the total amounts of jobs, with a slight increase, but a need to renovate, if you want, a lot of the staff, and at the same time changing skills. So this is a huge topic.
Thank you. José, do you want to add something?
Because I tend to look at labor force as really as one of the greatest opportunities we have in this transformation. It's a concern we have as well. But I've been in the industry for 25 years, Andy. Like you, 10 years ago, we were discussing who would be the last man standing in Europe. You know, and today we are making investments. These guys are making investments already that will preserve the industry for 100 years. So actually, this is great. Yeah, we need new talents. That was happening already. If you look at one of the most competitive steel companies in the United States is a company with a slogan that says, "We are a technology company that happens to make steel." So, you see, the technology was already in this industry 4.0, digitalization, so we are just accelerating it. Indeed, jobs will be different, will be more technology driven. Myself, my COO, for example, which is the guy responsible for technology and engineering, you know, it's a guy that comes from the energy sector, because we very soon we realize that we are moving away from the oil and coal times. Yeah. So we are moving from million BTUs to kilowatt hours. The steel industry in the future is electric. It's electricity. Huh? So the brilliant guy in my team is actually coming from the electricity sector, because our product, I like to say that we are going to make a metallic electricity. At the end of the day, that will be 40% of my cost. So actually, for the manpower, it's a great opportunity.
No, I was reflecting on a school visit I did some time ago to talk about sustainability, and it was one of the most popular, I think, talks, and I put that down naturally to myself, largely. But I think what else was interesting is I think half of the kids who came to hear were girls, and girls aren't, let's say, overly represented, perhaps, in some of our legacy, industries. The steel industry is very much a male industry. So I think there's hopefully a whole new opportunity for new folks. Robert, have you given any thought to the skills and the access to the kind of people that you're going to need to take, ArcelorMittal is a big company through this transformation?
Yeah, we were exactly this. I will not copy what has been said. Basically, we have the same challenge, and of course, it is a huge challenge. But I will just basically the same things. Having said that, what you're saying, this is a very European perspective, what we're just saying here. Outside Europe, you have different technologies, so this is not completely the story everywhere, at least not for the foreseeable future. So it could also be different in other regions. But for the rest, what Samuel and you described it, we have exactly the same.
Traditional skills, I think, is also an interesting point. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine I mentioned earlier in Australia, who told me that the rollout of electric vehicles in Australia, it wasn't being held back by availability of the vehicles themselves or availability of energy. It was all to do with trained electrical people who could install the electrical charging points. And it made me wonder about, if I look at our industry now, certainly within Europe and the developed world, our societies have moved away from manufacturing to a degree as we look at IT and these knowledge economies. There's going to be a huge need for traditional skills, right, across our industry as we build new DRI plants and redesign our steel plants. Are these skills going to be available? And if not, what do we need to do, or what's the message we need to give to universities and governments around this? Anyone have a view on that?
Future is digital, electric. So we need to work with, I believe we will embed a lot of much more technology. So I believe the messages we need to give to universities and...
but we need welders as well, right?
We need a lot of welders. We need a lot of technicians. We need bricklayers, because we are a high temperature industry. That won't change. So, however, I believe the way we are going to manufacture, the way we are going to install, the way we are going to maintain those refractories will be much more digital with the simulations and etc. Technology will be there. But yes, we are going to need welders. We are going to need the people that know how to bend steel, how to cut pieces. So we are a heavy industry, and that won't change. So I just believe that there will be safer, more digital, more cost-effective, and even on the way they are produced, they are manufactured, they will be much more conscious about the emissions they have in the value chain as well.
Maybe one thing to say also, what is the biggest problem? This is a huge problem, but the current number one problem of everything is permitting. You see that everywhere. So it's education, but it's particularly permitting, and not particularly for the steel industry, because it's everywhere. For renewables here in the room, this is really what is the bottleneck. If you hear the big problems of Ørsted, for instance, the other thing is material supply. Yeah. And that is also new in the world, that there's going to be a shortage of material supply for your new investments. And I think that is now coming up as a strategic issue globally. but you see it now also for the renewables, but not so much yet for the steel industry, I would say. But for everything around us, the enabling technologies and the enabling factors that we can invest in, that is a big bottleneck.
That's a great segue, Robert, to the conversation I wanted to finish off with around technology and infrastructure. One thing I would say, if you look at a steel plant, if you were looking to build a steel plant 20 years ago, what would you need? You need a deep water port and some land. One thing you didn't need to worry about is where I'm going to get my coal from. Am I going to be able to source coal? Am I going to be able to source iron ore? You just build a deep water port, some nice raw materials, handling yards, and you would buy it. That's not the world we live in now, right? The future in terms of infrastructure, in terms of technology and materials supply. You make a really good point about the quality of raw materials that we will need to use in these new technologies. That's all going to be different, right? And there's different ways, that we can manage that risk. One of them is taking new raw materials, high quality raw materials, using them in DRI pelleting, and that's going to be difficult because that's limited in terms of its supply, or you need energy to improve. The other is trying to find different ways of using the raw materials that we're using now. And I know, Samuel, at TKS, you're looking at how you can reconfigure the plant in order to capture some of those benefits of using the current raw materials, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we could spend another panel here discussing technologies. Indeed, that's an extremely fascinating topic. So we sort of know what's going to replace the blast furnace, right? That's probably going to be a DR plant for primary steel production, so direct reduction of iron ore. The question is, of course, what happens after? Where does it go, the product of your DR plant? Currently, there's two main routes. One is to go into a so-called electric arc furnace, which is a very proven technology, which we already have today, as was mentioned before, mostly for the recycling of steel. So it's a very proven technology. What we are doing, we are linking a so-called melter, a melting unit, next to the ER plant. So at the end of this process, we get exactly the same crude steel that we get from the blast furnace, which means we can then go into our existing assets, the converter, so the steel making plant, and of course all the downstream processes, and we can integrate it this way seamlessly and with minimal disruption within the existing plant. So that has a lot of advantages because we can produce exactly the same portfolio of high quality products and grades that we produce today. In addition, it was mentioned before, but we are not so dependent on the very high quality grade pellets and iron ore because we still have a smelting environment where we can actually, a reducing environment where we still produce slag as we do it today. That's an important other point. So we will still be having this byproduct that we have today, which is used in the cement industry as a replacement for clinker. So in the future, that will be green clinker as well. If the steel is green, then the clinker is green as well. Many other advantages from the point of view of connection to the grid. I mean, EAFs use a lot of peak, very high energy. Our technology is more stable. It uses constant energy, so it's easier to integrate to the grid. You consume less of the electrodes as well, which become costly. So yes. it uses them. Yeah. So there's lots of I would say elements why this is interesting, especially for large integrated sites. And our hope would certainly be that by doing this, we also do a kind of blueprint of how large integrated sites can be decarbonized. Because I'm sure that indeed there will be a place for new players, and of course this also stimulates the market very much, so that's of course needed. A big part of the challenge is of course also the transition. So how do we transition existing sites and how do we decarbonize them? And so we think that this can really be a blueprint, this combination of technology, the DR plant and the so-called melting unit, to actually seamlessly integrate it within and to run it in parallel with existing assets.
One of the questions that's come up here at the top is around the integration of renewables in power markets in the steel sector. José, at GravitHy, you're taking a slightly different approach, right, to your supply chains. That it kind of plays to this question, right, in terms of where do you make your metallics and how do you integrate that with raw materials?
Yeah, no, I believe that's a key point that we see in this transformation of the industry. Yeah? And I agree, Andy, what you said before. For example, steel plants, they were close to a deep sea harbor. But if we travel even far back on time, it wasn't. They were close to a coal mine. That was the whole deal, to be close to the raw materials, because logistics was not there. I'm now talking 150 years back. And then we realized actually today we know how to move materials, so we don't need to be close to the coal mine. So if a Martian would arrive today, I don't know if he would put a steel plant in a whole area. You know, it made a lot of sense back on time because the coal was there. So, you know, and then later, no, now we need to be close to a deep sea harbor. We believe that we are starting a new era where steel plants, at least the iron part, will be close to electricity. So GravitHy, we are taking an approach that we are close to a deep sea harbor because we need to bring the iron ore from overseas, and to be close to competitive, low carbon, and available electricity from the grid. It's the French grid. So we are here in IRENA, renewable energy. We are pro-nuclear. We believe the big challenge we have today is climate change, and this is related to CO2. So our mission to accelerate the decarbonization of the steel industry, we believe that France, for example, can be a very competitive place to produce iron to feed a transforming steel industry.
We think so too.
Yeah, that's true.
Kristen, I mean, you've got a history in both camps, right? I'm just looking at the top question. Maybe it's a good time to explain to these folks, why is iron ore quality perhaps more important if we're looking at hydrodynamic? And what are the challenges in using lower quality iron ore?
To be very honest, I'm a downstream expert. I guess you know that much better than me. Yeah? But as far as I understood, the DRI process needs the higher iron ore, right? But you explained what will happen. We will, of course, start with the higher quality iron ore in our DRI tower, because also we are a startup. But I truly believe one thing: the technology always improves, right? And we had that also with the casting. We had the, how is it called, blockus before, and then the continuous casters, and then everything went to the continuous casters. And I think we also will find a solution for that in the near future.
Robert, ArcelorMittal, you have a portfolio of technologies, right, which you're developing, quite impressive, that go from CCS through hydrogen, electrolysis. Even you're investing directly in Boston Metal, and I think having your own investments in your own projects in that area. How do you see those being applied? Are you doing that because you're looking to pick a winner? Or do you see different roles for those technologies within the different regions you're operating?
Exactly the opposite. So because some people say this is the technology of the world, and let's say hydrogen, and we believe in that technology, but you're not sure you can apply that everywhere. And that's been said, there may be places where other technologies are better and more cost effective. And this is not the only reason. There's also a need, we think, possibly for a mix of the technologies. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're doing the green DRI, but then you still have a transition. Maybe for the audience, it's good to know, a DRI plant, if you use that with gas, you're already having 65% reduction of your emissions compared to the traditional route. The remaining, if you then use green hydrogen, it goes to 90-something%. So the first step is actually the biggest reduction. And even if you do green hydrogen, we still need to get rid of the remaining emissions. So, for instance, a CCUS technology could be necessary along the route, but even at the end. So I hope that answers your question. It's fundamental technologies, for instance, in the US, for instance, there's IRA provides really great incentives for CCS, just plain CCS, and a steel plant, conventional. But also these technologies, I said, the transitional technologies and the end technologies, we think they could need, depending on where you are, CCUS technologies. So that is extremely important. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. We have about 5 minutes to go, so I need to wrap things up, as I suspected. We could keep going probably for a long time, but that won't make us popular. So what I'm going to do is I want to just go around each of you and ask each of you two things. One is if you could put your finger on the most critical innovation or area where innovation is needed that will facilitate the transition with our sector quicker. Because one thing certainly is the case, we need to accelerate. And the second would be just to ask you, what's the role? We're here at IRENA event, I'm here as World Steel, and those of you who are current steelmakers, because you have to be a current steelmaker, here are members of World Steel. I generally hope that H2 Green Steel and GravitHy will join us in time when you move into production. But what's the role of IRENA, World Steel, those transnational bodies? What can we really do? So those are the two questions. Key innovation or key area of innovation and the role that IRENA and World Steel and others can play. Where should we start? José.
Yeah, pleasure. So innovation, for me, I believe we need to realize that we are coming from centuries of an industry that was very conservative in the production modes and the market we serve. And we are on a major transformation. So we need to innovate from technology to processes to products, but mainly in the business model. We have to understand that we are changing the industry. We have to open our minds to realize that maybe for example, GravitHy, what we are planning to do, showing that let's make iron where it makes sense to make iron. Let's make steel where it makes sense to make steel. And this is it's an innovation in a business model that it's not so easy to get through. So I believe, and then it comes back actually to your second question on IRENA and World Steel. I believe you guys have a contribution to educating the market, financial sectors, policy makers. That we need a legislation, we need standards. If I come back to your first question to Sam, what's the ideal definition of green steel? Well, I believe, to be honest, I believe we can have different opinions. It will be good or bad, but at least we need to have one. What we cannot have is an endless discussion that we don't know how to justify our business model because we don't know, maybe things will change tomorrow. So I believe you guys have really a role to play in helping us as independent partners.
Robert, I got a feeling I know what you're going to say.
The most innovative part to invest in is in France, apparently, which is not how people would say the regions where you have abundant electricity, but it is, of course, then it's a nuclear card we're drawing. And of course, we also strongly believe in France, that the production in there. I think what we didn't discuss here is the part of the innovative or the quality of the steel. And so you have lower quality, which you make with, for instance, with recycling only. Yeah. But what we really need is to keep the upstream industry to making, you're saying, where is the upstream industry going? Is it going to your coal mine? It is also important, upstream industry is with your markets. And in Europe, we happen to have a huge market, maybe the biggest in the world. That is really crucial because in your upstream goes also to specifics for your high quality, for your end products. And sometimes this is forgotten. So I think that is very important to keep that innovative part there. Because
what can we in IRENA do to support that?
It's a bit the same discussion because the devil is very much in the regional detail, unfortunately, I would say, these days. And for steel industry, that's unfortunate because steel industry is, of course, a global, very internationally traded industry. And I would say IRENA and World Steel should be giving, indeed, the examples of what is possible, should be, say, if it is possible to develop standards, for instance, on what is low carbon green steel. Can then regions agree on that? Question mark. But you can actually, that could be a participation of that. Now, then thirdly, as I discussed, as I mentioned, they have these regional initiatives on climate policy, which are now maybe merging. Now, eventually, that might be even coming world, but I think you could also play a role in that development.
Thank you. As you'd expect, live conversations in all of those areas, but they're not easy.
Not easy at all.
They're not easy at all. Sam, what would you?
Being at IRENA, but also because that's really the main driver, I think we heard it here, it's really renewables and renewables deployment and how we can really accelerate this deployment, especially, I mean, in our case, in Germany, in Europe. So deploy the renewable energy, but also make sure that we as industry, as the big consumers, can access this renewable energy. Yeah. And that's a big issue. One very concrete example, we will now be auctioning tendering hydrogen for our first plant. I mean, one of the biggest issues we have is the guarantees we actually need to provide in order to enter into those contracts. So accessing this renewable energy is a big issue.
So potentially a role for IRENA then as the intergovernmental concerned with such things?
Yeah, I would say two things. I mean, one is, of course, the analysis of the trends, the bottlenecks, the pathways. This is extremely valuable. It provides a lot of sort of perspective and insights into what will be or will likely be future developments. And then the other thing is indeed standards. I think developing these definitions. I mean, on steel, on hydrogen. To make sure that these future markets can actually function according to common rules and standards, I think this is an avenue.
Main thing is not innovative. That's you're trying to get to innovation, and that's nice, and we should have that. But the main challenge is not innovation; it's the large-scale deployment of what is there, and energy, be the technology to get the investments running.
I want to round things off, Christopher. What's your take on key innovation and the role that we can play?
I don't know if it's key innovation, but maybe it's also part of this. But I think it was said here, and the main reason why we are in Boden, which is so far in the north, as we've discussed it, is just that there is enough energy, which is landlocked, and we can use that, and that gives us the possibility of producing the hydrogen, of course, then also the steel. And I think this is, and not only for the steel, it's for the whole industry in Europe. It's so important that we get access to the green energy. And we had the discussion, if you go with the traditional steel plant, and I think the same is also for all the other industry, if you change that from the traditional way of producing to pure electricity, what we are doing in Boden, because the electricity is there, then the electricity you need for that compared to that what you needed before was 10 times higher or so. And this is really, I would say, not only for the steel industry, it's also for the surviving of Europe as the main industrial part of the world. It's so important.
What I know, Andy, is that IRENA and World Steel, you guys will have to work more and more together because I believe the steel industry will be a deployer, an enabler of a renewable energy development, and vice versa. We need a lot of electricity.
Well, to facilitate that, because I'm getting glared at by IRENA at the moment, who really want me to terminate the session on time and give the floor to Lewis. So I will do that, and I will build some of that understanding by terminating our session now, relatively on time. I want to thank all of you guys for coming here today and for your contributions. There's a lot more we could have talked about hydrogen storage and some of the technology options, but it's, from my perspective, it's been a great conversation. I hope those here have enjoyed listening to it as much as I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. And if I could just ask Luis Janeiro, team lead of the end-use sectors at IRENA, to come up here for some concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicia. And thank you very much, Andrew, and the panelists for coming here today. It's really, for us, it's really critical to understand what are your challenges, so we can inform policymakers to actually take smart decisions. So How can I summarize this? I see, first of all, I see a lot of progress. So 3 years ago, we had another innovation week, and the results of the discussion were quite more conservative than this one. At that point, we were talking about a few pilot plants and also very conservative statements, and now we are talking about real volumes, commercial scale, approaching investment decision or with investment decision there, and also very much widespread around the world and around the industry. So that's really great to see. Especially some of our panelists having actual skin in the game, saying that you don't want to sell your steel too cheap because you are very convinced that it's going to be a very valuable commodity in a few years. Second thing that I take from this is technology doesn't seem to be an impediment anymore. So of course we have a lot to improve, but we do have the tools. And what I hear from the panel is that the sector really needs the enabling conditions there. That's a broad set of things. One important thing is that policy is very clear, visible over the long term, so that you can go to the bank and actually secure a project. That's obviously very clear. In some cases, you will need economic support in some form. Another topic that was touched upon was clear regulations and standards. That's something where IRENA is also working, IEA is also working, other agencies are working, and we're looking forward to work together with World Steel on that. I think that's also very clear. If there's no clear definition of what is green steel, you cannot fund a project, and you cannot generate the demand. Another key takeaway that I take from here is that the sector will need vast amounts of renewable energy. And I would like to, I think that this probably summarizes best this part, the interlinkage between the power sector and the steel sector. We are going to make metallic electricity. I think that shows how interlinked both of them will be. And of course, the topic of a level field internationally, that obviously calls for international cooperation, where we are very much looking forward to work on that topic. We cannot ensure that we will have a carbon price for everybody internationally. That has shown to be difficult in the past, but we will do our best to facilitate cooperation internationally. So this is just a very quick summary. Of course, we will go back to the discussion and extract more insights from this. We will make sure that the insights that we collect today feed into IRENA's ongoing activities in support of our member countries. This will include the next World Energy Transitions Outlook and our next Innovation Landscape Report. Also, we will summarize the key takeaways from this session and other sessions of Innovation Week that will feed into COP28. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much, Andrew, for moderating the session, and for the panelists for coming and sharing your concerns. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming.